Hello, Mr. Gheorghiu.
Hello, how are you?
Good. So now we are again with classics.
Yeah, we try to show a lot of very beautiful and interesting games from the old grandmasters. They are well known, of course, Lasker, Capablanca, Alekhine, and so on, but a little bit forgotten like this, unfortunately, because the young players today they
They are too
don't
busy.
really know the history of chess.
Yes.
These players represent really the chess history because they created everything. The theory, the variations, the openings, and so on.
Yes.
So therefore, it's very interesting to see how they played. By the highest level like this. You see.
Yeah.
So we start with this match, Lasker against Capablanca, played in one of the most important tournaments of that time. St. Petersburg in 1914. All right. Um, so this is a very well-known variation from the Spanish opening, played in that time the way they played. Now it's another modern line, a little bit different,
Yeah.
but the idea is the same. You see. So the idea is well, like this, it's very clear. E takes d4, queen takes d4, and they trade queens. You see. So now afterwards, the idea for white is very simple. White tries to arrive in some kind of an end game. This is the main idea of this opening from this position. If somehow they can trade all the pieces, you see,
Yes.
I mean, they have only
What?
kings and pawns on board. Every position is one for white if they arrive there
Yes.
because of the pawn structure. 4 against 3 on the queen side, but the black has two double pawns, c7 and c6, and 4 against 3 clear on the king side. Therefore, every endgame is winning for white. But to arrive in endgame is a long way to go. You see, but this
Yes.
is the main idea.
Yeah.
Every very strong player tries to get to this endgame. We had a very beautiful example later on. We showed already. It's a fantastic game between Fischer and Dunziker, where Fischer demonstrated how to arrive by tactical way in such an endgame, and
I
he
remember.
won like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, probably they, because they invented everything, probably they had the same idea in mind,
Yeah.
Capablanca and well, okay. So we'll see what happens. Knight c2, knight c3, knight e7, castle, castle. Okay. And now very quickly f4. Well, already from here, later on commenting the game, Lasker and Capablanca had the same idea. Probably is the best way to play for black is here bishop c5 because everything is more or less forced. Bishop c5, bishop e3, of course, no, because you have to defend the knight. And afterwards, later on, black can try to have such a possibility, to play b6, c5, bishop b7, or bishop d7, and arrive in such a position with different color bishops. Black has white bishop, white has black bishop. Well, the structure is the same, but it's very difficult to win because the color of the two bishops is different. And this usually with such a material on board is very difficult to win. So from here, how we demonstrated many times, black has to play the best moves, all the time to keep
The
the
balance.
balance like this. White is a little bit better all the time because of this structure. So if black plays two, three small, not mistakes, but not the
Inaccuracies.
best moves, you see, then black has some problems. So we'll see what happens later on. So knight b3. Now he tries to avoid this possibility. Knight b3. Okay, f6, f5. Well, very interesting f5. Usually, um, if you look like this, it can't be the best move. Why? Because the structure now is different and is very difficult to advance later. And here again, black probably had to play c5 or b6 with the main idea, the way we told you before. The idea is to, trade the bishop in f4 and then have such a small fortress with the pawns b6, c5, and put the bishop somewhere in b6 or in b7 or in c6. And okay, probably he can resist by best play like this. It's difficult, but white is a little bit better, but not very much. All right. So, in my opinion, Capablanca, after so many years, looking at the game, he probably underestimated a little bit, the possibilities, being sure that his defense is always at very high level and he can't never lose such a position. But it is possible against Lasker, of course. Lasker also a very strong player. All right. Very simple. Bishop f4. Now, what to do? You take in f4 first or bishop b7. Well, he thought probably that giving white the possibility to take in d6, now the structure is a little bit better. You don't
Yeah.
have any more double pawns.
Yes.
But the problem is that you have still a weakness in d6. So white takes, and then it's very clear. White can attack immediately the small weakness from d6, and therefore white is clearly better here now. Even if it's not too much, but it has a weakness in d6, and another possibility for white is to come with a piece in e6, and then it's not clear what happens. You see? All
But
right.
now wasn't better to just push the pawn?
D5, okay, white can even take in d5 or knight e6 first, and it's always a little bit difficult for black. Not lost or something, but unpleasant,
I mean, to
unpleasant.
eliminate the weakness from this
Well,
six.
but the problem is that if d5, knight e6, for instance,
Yes.
if black takes in e4, is already quite bad because he can take back with the knight, and another knight comes to d6, and then
Oh, too many knights.
it's a little bit too dangerous. Okay, now the white possibilities are clearly better because he has a pressure. He can put a pressure on this D file. First of all, and look, the position is a little bit artificial for black. You see, so has to try to get some counter chance. All right, rook D1. Okay, so now what did he play? Knight C8. Well, again, knight C8 unpleasant, but if it's necessary, it's unpleasant to tell the truth. To look at this, bishop in b7, knight c8, rook d7, rook e8. A little bit artificial, you see, the defense. Well, everything is protected. He doesn't lose for the time being nothing. I mean, he doesn't lose a pawn or something, but it's a, pressure
Yeah.
for white, you see. Okay, so now b5, all right, and rook d2. Good. Now it's clear. He, puts much pressure on the d file. You see. So what to do now? Rook e7. It seems, and probably it was all right. In some cases, black is ready to give the exchange for one pawn, and probably was the best way to play. Even if white keeps some advantage, but it's not so clear because the position is still closed. It's very difficult to to have something more. I mean, it's a small edge, but very difficult to realize. Well, the problem now in the next moves is that Capablanca, very unusual for him, didn't give the exchange to have some nice counterplay, and he tried to move here and there, waiting
To
to see
defend.
what happens to defend. Yeah. And that by this very high level is a little bit too much, if you give such possibilities to your opponent. Okay. Now everything was ready. Here already, if black takes in e6, well, it's more or less all right. I mean, he takes and then comes with the king. And the next idea is if the pawn from d6 is protected twice, then you have time with black to play knight b6, knight c4. If you arrive in c4, it's almost impossible to lose, for black. Because how can white do something, White is a little bit better, but very difficult to get through. Okay, so he didn't do this. All right, knight bishop a8, such a move from Capablanca.
Waiting.
Well, waiting, but he waits too much. This is the problem. Now white starts on the other side, of course. Now g4. Okay, a6 again, waiting. You see, rook d3, a5. Okay, so So what did he play? H4. All right, H4. Took. And now again, he came back. After the game, he recommended himself Rook A3, which probably was all right. Rook A3 is a little bit more active, because at least he has a counter chance. More difficult for white to get through, Well, Rook E7, he waits again. Now it's a small difference. He could again give an exchange in E6, the same idea, the way we told you before. But it's a little bit different because now white can come with a rook in A1 and the file is open.
Yeah.
This is the small difference, but it's nothing decisive yet. So he decided to wait a little bit too much. And now again, what did he play here? G6. He could play G5 check immediately. Was probably a little bit better also. Okay, G6. Now after rook G3, he decided to give check now, you see. Well, G5 check, all right. King F3, of course. Lasker is waiting because he's better, clearly better in all positions. And he can move here and there, in every position he can keep up, a strong pressure like this.
But now this pawn wasn't available to take the why he didn't took the pawn here, for example?
What did he play?
He took here the pawn.
Well, now he could take again, Now takes, yeah. Now you mean rook h3. Well,
Yes.
it's not necessary because after, okay, it's okay to take the pawn, but at least after rook takes d6, black probably had a small counterplay with knight c4, knight e5 check. This was the idea, you see.
Okay.
Also better for white, but with the knight in e5 is excellent for black if he can have such a strong knight on the central square.
Yes.
But it's not necessary because now white has two threats: rook h7 check and the rook from a1, coming from the other side. That will happen in the game later on. You see, rook h3. Okay, so it's very unpleasant for black already this position. So king g3, waiting again. I mean, he gives you the move. Now you have to do something. And now it starts, the decisive part of the game, you see. Not very difficult. Any very strong grandmaster probably would win such a position against the world champion, you see. Because the advantage is very big. The knight from e6 is really paralyzing the position, He has the h file. There are two threats, rook h8 and rook h7, very unpleasant, both, And, okay, he has to wait. All right, and now he took e5, excellent move. I mean, he gives the pawn, but he comes in a decisive way with the knight on e4, We show many times the centralizing the pieces. Centralizing the pieces is almost always decisive, you see. So now after knight e4, the position is terrible for black, you see, because they had the threat to take in f6 and the knight on c5. And the square d6 is also very weak. So the position, in my opinion, is already lost black here. So now Lasker realizes the big advantage. Okay, bishop c8.
Now he gives the exchange.
He gives the exchange because he had no choice. I mean, if he moved the rook, white could take the bishop, rook takes, and knight d6 check, and he loses the rook. You see?
Okay.
It was even worse.
Yes.
So now if you have to give the exchange in such a position, it's terrible. So, okay, he took, and now he takes the 7th rank. Okay, here he could resign. Black could resign already here, He continues a little bit, probably time trouble, and now rook a1 on the other side, threatens mate in a1, in a8. So king d8, check there, and what? Knight c5, Zugzwang. And he resigned.
He resigned, yes.
There are many threats. Knight e6 check, rook d7 check, terrible. And knight b7 check, So I told you, the knight is fantastic, He gives you one check and finished this. So I must say that it's a pity that we saw Capablanca in such a shape. I mean, it's very rare that such a player like Capablanca could lose a game like this, without any counterplay, you see.
Yeah, it was one way.
One way, of course. So therefore, but it was a real demonstration from Lasker. What can we say? Especially by that time, you see.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Gheorghiu.
You're welcome.